Chapter 31 Finnigan Fennec. After hearing what had happened to Natalia and Buck from both Father Victor and Todd Reddington, when Finnigan asked them over the phone, Finnigan knew what he was going to do. He was going to free them from Inari's comfortable captivity, and now it was just a matter of how. He too was very much hated by Inari for being friends with Tanukis, and treating them like people, and having no respect for kitsune culture he believed didn't serve what he thought made sense or see in actuality. He also intentionally vandalized parts of the ancient Okami Inari shrine in Inari City that belonged to Inari's family for 4,000 years, out of spite, and pissed on the graves of nobles, some of which were Inari's ancestors, whom he blamed as collectively responsible for making his country a hellhole, and therefore didn't deserve any respect. And even though Inari had him publicly beaten for this, he had no regrets about what he did. Finnigan also knew that there wasn't a chance he could take on all the protogen guards in Inari's palace, nor was there a chance Inari would let him go if she captured him too. But this was for Natalia and Buck, whom he knew did nothing wrong, and didn't deserve what was happening to them, and was willing to take a risk and rescue them. And despite Kitsune clan being the country of his birth, Finnigan was a red-blooded American Fennec fox, and had no feelings for the Kitsune clan, after all the evil it did in stealing his youth, and a prosperity he would never experience himself. He was born on February 7th, 1923, during the Long Depression, from 1921 to 1948, and the collapse of traditional kitsune culture that was destroyed shortly after. He also at that time, along with his generation, were regularly insulted and derided by the older generation for daring to ask for the basic opportunity to earn the necessities of life, only to be told, work harder, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get some marketable skills, and so on and so forth, by a generation that was already established and hoarded their wealth for themselves, and left Finnigan's generation with less than nothing. And they weren't lazy or incompetent either, and were willing to do what it took to improve their situation. Yet for all their efforts, it would never amount to anything, because there was never a means for their efforts to have a meaningful impact on their lives, while only enriching the nobility and corporate overlords. And seeing the wealthy elite hoard their wealth, while the masses suffered in the mass exploitation of workers in all main industries of kitsune society, all for the marginal increase of capital, Finnigan was radicalized and became a member of the Communist Party. He did this because the Communists were some of the only groups that attempted any collective action against the abuses of the capitalist class of industrialists, nobility, and corrupt clergy. And there was the speech of the Communist Party leader within the Kitsune clan, Vladimir Squidovich, that said,
"The gentle laborers shall no longer suffer under the greed of the capitalists. We shall saw the foundations of big business and nobility in half. No more shall the clergy of these fake gods oppress the proletariat with their lies and delusions, and in their ashes we will build a new age of equality, united in friendship and labor. The dream of a people, with their fortress secure, shall ever endure."
Finnigan quickly rose through the party ranks, despite his youth, and went on to organize the logistics in the Hulijing province for the seizing the means of production from the factory owners, believing that he was creating a better future for his people. But when he saw the leaders of the Communist Party betray the cause and become like the capitalists, the nobility they fought against, and somehow became even worse, he turned on them and joined Inari's ranks and destroyed the communist revolution before it could successfully take over an important province. And when Inari had the leaders of the Communist Party publicly executed for starting a revolution, Finnigan attended and said to Vladimir and the other leaders who betrayed the cause, "Let them eat cake," before the army opened fire executing the communist leaders. Finnigan was spared from this, despite participating in the rebellion, because Inari saw his skills and abilities as useful but would cost Finnigan his freedom, not that he had any to begin with, in his social caste, and owing a life debt to Inari. And despite Finnigan having a comfortable life serving Inari as one of her 20th century high-class slaves during the Cold War between Sulsura and the Union of Ceylonese Communist Republics, he didn't feel any different about the wealthy elite that destroyed his generation's opportunity and shamed them when they never even had a chance to build their own prosperity to begin with. And when some of these wealthy elite died young from their lives of excessive hedonism, destroying their bodies, he would visit their graves and piss on them. And although Finnigan had a weak intuition and was terrible at reading between the lines, he knew enough to know wealth in the Kitsune clan was not gained through hard work and merit like Sulsura, but inherited and being born in the right place at the right time. Because if it was really based on merit and hard work, Finnigan's generation would be one of the wealthiest to ever exist, and Inari would be poorer than dirt. And from this, Finnigan learned not to judge the people for their financial situation and other generations and refused to shame them for the hard times they went through. It was also during this time that Finnigan was an atheist, from his heavy Marxist influence, despite on paper being part of the cult of Okami Inari. And it was his atheism and Marxism as to why he despised Friar Victor under the perception that all he does is eat and pray and not contribute to society in any meaningful way, and was no different than the corrupt clergy who sow false consciousness, as per the words of Karl Marx. But Finnigan would eventually have a bad spiritual experience where he claimed to see Okami Inari be channeled through Inari's body. That terrified him and caused him to no longer be an atheist, and accepting that there are more things to the world that he doesn't know than just the physical motion of atoms and chemicals. But even as part of the cult of Okami Inari, he still hated Friar Victor, because after all, monasticism, according to the cult of Okami Inari, the most widely practiced religion in the Kitsune society, was seen as a failure and something shameful. And it was seen as shameful because the solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience were opposed to the cult's values of material prosperity, pleasure, and glory as the highest goods. And the other widely practiced religion that was native to Kitsune society that was not the cult of Okami Inari was the cult of warrior spirits, where there was once a great temple in the Yako tribe. And the values of that cult of warrior spirits was much more ascetical, and to which Sozan Yako belonged before he was a Christian. And Sozan Yako, son of the patriarch of the Yako tribe, was involved with Father Grigori in destroying the altar and idols in that temple and converting it into the Yako family's personal chapel by their own request, to whom it belonged to. But as Finnigan continued to serve Inari and made offerings to Okami Inari at the ancient Inari shrine in Inari City, things began to change as Finnigan began to see the hypocrisy and greed of the priests of Okami Inari and the Fox Queen herself. And during this time, Finnigan began to understand that Friar Victor was telling him the truth the whole time. But before he could inquire into Father Victor, Finnigan had been falsely accused of a serious crime he didn't commit by one of the priests of Okami Inari, and Inari believed the false charges because of Finnigan's past. It was 2011, and Inari had Finnigan involuntarily signed up as a test subject for artificial ethereal magic as punishment. And the whole reason Inari wanted to create it was so she could have the power and abilities of a Ninetales without having to go through the difficult nature of gaining the 8th and 9th tail through humility and a pure heart, nor have the insanity of being a false Ninetales through stealing tails from other kitsunes like Gumiho. But rather than create artificial ethereal magic, the magical research laboratory was completely destroyed, and Finnigan was teleported to Earth and left to fend for himself, with no weapons and no one to keep him company. And on Earth, it was a completely alien planet to him, and given his biology as a Fennec fox kitsune, he couldn't handle the cold very well and was stranded in the middle of Alaska. So he tried to make a shelter and something to make fire with immediately. And all he needed was wood because he could start a fire with his kitsune by. And when he was ready, he used the direction of the sun rising and setting as a natural compass, and figured he was in the northern hemisphere and began trekking south to eventually get into more favorable weather. He also made sure to catch fish so he would have something to eat. And for a long time it seemed pretty hopeless until he found a human settlement, with their main economy being oil drilling. But before he could raid it, he would watch from a distance so he could figure out a plan. And this plan failed, because he had a debilitating fear of dogs and was captured alive by a group of Alaskan citizens. He, of course, didn't understand a word they said, nor did they understand anything he said. But being captured was still better than being stranded in the wilderness. At least there was some resemblance of civilization here. And it took some time, but eventually Finnigan learned to speak American, which made his life much easier. But with Finnigan being the only one of his kind on Earth, it was lonely despite being surrounded by people. But wanting to understand what Finnigan was, the townsfolk called in a medical doctor and a veterinarian to examine Finnigan, but asked that they keep this quiet, so the United States government wouldn't get involved. After all, the government for the most part stayed out of their lives, and the people liked it kept that way. Unfortunately, word got around about Finnigan, and people got curious, especially the federal government and military that had a lot of secret research projects in Alaska. After all, they didn't want any of their research projects breaking loose and falling into the hands of foreign adversaries, such as the genetic research project codenamed Project Florida Man. And the townsfolk were naturally outraged when the U.S. Army showed up in their mining town over Finnigan seeing that such a response to a disproportionate to a single person where local police would have been good enough. But not wanting to cause any trouble, Finnigan went along with it and was interrogated at the base. Any potential leads about what he was and where he came from were looked into. But no matter how hard they tried and tests they did on him, they couldn't find anything about Finnigan other than his biology being related to some old East Asian folk tales, even though Finnigan never came from there. But seeing that Finnigan wasn't a threat to society and wanting to keep his existence quiet, Finnigan was released back into the mining town under the condition that he would cooperate with the U.S. government to maintain his freedom, given that he had no rights being an alien from another planet. And so Finnigan agreed to this arrangement, which also involved a path to citizenship if he continued to cooperate. After all, discovering a magical creature that was not an everyday occurrence, and the U.S. military wanted to see if such abilities could be harnessed and be made useful as a weapon. But only having one kitsune on hand, not a whole lot of research could be done, and big advances in magical energy research would not happen for another 50 years, with Dr. Rudolf Schleiden from Switzerland, whom Finnigan was a partner with and became one of the first members of his 50 states program for the magically gifted. And in its early days, it was used for scientific research of magical energy and its effects on matter and useful purposes. But as time went on, especially in the Sulsuran American War, The 50 states program was to be absorbed by the U.S. military for the purpose of acquiring exceptionally powerful magical creatures, and using them as a means for dealing with magical threats where conventional military force was not optimal. And it was during this time as a member of the 50 states program that Finnigan would feel most at home on an alien planet, and where he first met Buck and Natalia and grew close to them. And that is what motivated Finnigan to rescue them from Inari. Finnigan's plan. For a couple of days, Finnigan was gathering information on the logistics of Inari's palace, and through Father Victor learned where Inari was keeping Buck and Natalia. He also learned that the palace has magic suppression devices all around, so he wasn't going to have his kitsune magic to help him. So, instead, he would exploit the agreement between Inari and Father Victor to civilize Buck and Natalia and use this to his advantage to transport them to the Fennec province bordering the Neko kingdom. After all, illegally crossing into the Tanuki Republic was already a lost cause, with how much that border was patrolled and a 50-foot wall lining the border and going 15 feet into the ground. And escaping by sea was also a lost cause, with the Kitsune Navy continually on patrol around all the islands. And air travel was also out of the option, with IDs being checked every flight. All that was left was to get through the desert into the Neko kingdom and call for American transport to pick them up. After all, Finnigan didn't want to stay in the Neko kingdom longer than he had to, because of its third world status and instability. And for as much as Finnigan hated the Kitsune clan, at least it had stability and order, and everyone knew it. Finnigan also knew it wasn't just a matter of rescuing Buck and Natalia, but Titania too, even though she wasn't being held captive. To make matters worse, Titania was also spending much time socializing with Inari, so it wasn't like Finnigan could get Titania out easily. As for Titania herself, despite her initial confrontation with Inari, she didn't hold any hate in her heart after hearing Inari's perspective, but just thought that she was childish and doing what everyone else thought rather than following what she valued. But nonetheless, Inari said to Titania in a motherly way, "As their queen, it is my responsibility to care for them as well as you while you're in my kingdom. And part of maintaining a stable kingdom for both my age and the age to come is upholding the traditions we have. I follow the collective understanding of my kingdom and don't lean on my own understanding, because there's so much I don't know. And I think people who lean on their own understanding as their sole guiding light are a danger to themselves and others. That is how we get ideologues that destroy their countries and their identities, and leave nothing for future generations, unlike my father, who planted trees under whose shade he would never sit. I do not follow my heart out of a hatred for myself, but because living by subjective feelings that are so fickle is a very unstable way to live. And people who rule based on their subjective feelings are worse than the ideologues, because even the ideologues have some system of thought, whereas those that follow their heart base their decisions on feelings that have no basis on anything outside themselves, and change as much as the wind. And it's partially why, if it came down to it, I would rather have my brother rule in my place instead of my little sister Zenko. But, despite my thinking of him as a potential great king, his god has a higher authority than me, and has claimed my brother for himself." Titania then asked, "With all this talk of being queen, how are you going to have a child at your age and to take your place? Aren't you afraid of it will cause a civil war over succession when there's no one to rule after you?" Inari answered confidently, "For the longest time I thought the kingdom would end with me. But I learned about something that may help. Some medical researchers have discovered how to turn skin cells into egg cells. And then it's just a matter of going through the operation and hormone treatment to get the replacement eggs inside my ovaries and find a Todd to get me pregnant. Don't worry. I still have decades left in me, so it's not like the kit is going to grow up without knowing who its father and mother are. And who exactly are you going to marry? I'd prefer it be someone who cares more about me and the future of my kingdom than my checkbook. Men who only want you for your money and status, but not you as a person, are less than worthless, and we'd all be better off without them. Yet, when you're extremely wealthy and a queen like me, that's the kind of men you attract most of the time. Why do you think so many kings are so incompetent when the sole reason for their marriage was not for loving their wives and who would care about the welfare of their kingdoms, but someone merely being an instrument towards their political end? And being the queen in most cultures meant you're just the king's pleasure object and only exist to give him a son, no matter how sickly or deformed that son is from inbreeding. And if he really cared about the kingdom and married out of love and shared purpose and not for hoarding wealth and prosperity, unlike me, who shares her hedonism and prosperity, why wouldn't they need to inbreed so much? But I do draw my hedonistic line at promiscuity and drugs for myself, because I know what sexual promiscuity does and how it is a disease spreader and how drugs and promiscuity destroy relationships that are important to maintaining a healthy society. My thinking is that if I'm going to be hedonistic, I'm going to be hedonistic acts I'm not going to do hedonistic acts I can't recover from, and stick to things I can enjoy, like indulging in luxuries and delicacies and daintiness. And although it seems unlikely, I'd probably marry my right paw-hand man for centuries, Sozan Yako. And marrying him, even though I really connect him, is not guaranteed because he chose not to remarry after his first wife died, out of honor for her. And I don't want to force him and will respect his decision to say no if that's his choice. Marrying a no-jitsune? Inari interjected. Redeemed no-jitsune. The first of his kind. Never have I seen a true no-jitsune be redeemed from his impurity and transformed into a true Ninetales and gained a pure heart. Even if I didn't know about the resurrection or any of the miracles of Jesus, seeing his servants redeem a no-jitsune is already evidence enough of his power and goodness. And that means that this god, in particular, has the power to save my kingdom, even if I make no sacrifice to him in attempt to get him to look favorably on my people. Then why aren't you a Christian? I'm still inquiring and have many questions I'm seeking answers to. If I'm going to denounce my very title as Image of Inari and publicly renounce my allegiance I have towards Okami Inari and risk everything I have received from her, I'm not going to do that unless I'm very sure I'm making the right decision. And every day it seems more like the right decision with how corrupt the priests of Okami Inari are, and literally asking me to commit acts of impurity against my own citizens for supposed prosperity, which in the end would be no prosperity at all, but just senseless violence. And the more I see these things, the more it seems like Okami Inari is not a benevolent spirit, but a demonic spirit from the underworld that hates us and wants to see us kill each other over material things after we are already living comfortably. Meanwhile, what are the Christians in my kingdom doing? I'm not sure for all of them, but for my chief executive, Vixie. She's a very devoted person and actively putting in all her efforts for the well-being of my kingdom and her family in the name of her god. That's not even a crime, but the opposite of one if she influenced her god to be favorable to us. Yet the priests of Okami Inari think of her as one of the most impure things to ever exist. I don't understand why someone of her high reputation and status would willingly choose to live like everyone else instead of as someone befitting of her high social standing as my chief executor, but I guess that's a mystery I'll solve later. And while Inari and Titania were conversing, Finnigan found a way to get into Inari's palace unnoticed. If he couldn't use his kitsune magic to disguise himself, he did the next best thing, cosplaying. So Finnigan cosplayed as a priest, claiming to be an associate of Father Victor, which was half true. And given that most of the palace staff didn't know much about clerical vestments, they were fooled by Finnigan's cosplay and impersonation. And when Finnigan got to Buck and Natalia's room, he gave them the secret gesture that meant, "I need you to play along, I'm getting you out of here." Meanwhile, Inari was taking Titania back to Buck and Natalia's room after a wonderful time socializing with treats, and she saw straight through Finnigan's bad cosplay and shot him with her concealed blaster pistol. She then said, "It was bold of you to come back here. Did you really think you could trick me, impersonating a priest like that when my brother was the real thing?" Finnigan answered while unable to move the rest of his body, "Kind of." Inari stood over him with one foot on Finnigan's back. "Who do you take me for?" "The vixen that destroyed my generation's future?" Inari took her foot off him. "As if I had anything to do with those aristocrats being greedy. Blame them and not me for hoarding their prosperity. Now, what to do with you?" Inari thought for a moment about what she was going to do with Finnigan in light of his relationship to Buck and Natalia all being members of the 50 States program for the magically gifted. And then she had an idea in light of her possibly becoming a catechumen. If I'm going to gain favor with Victor's God for the well-being of my kingdom, and part of that is learning his ways. So if I'm going to gain favor, I'm going to show you mercy. Here's the deal. I can throw you into a labor camp for refusing to repay the life debt you owe me. It has been accruing interest over the course of a century, which you will never be able to pay off, or you can take my offer to cancel the entire life debt you owe me." Natalia then asked, "Finnigan, what is all this about?" Inari answered for him, "It has nothing to do with you two tanukis. Finnigan used to be a communist and partially led a revolution against me, and I showed him mercy and let him serve my purposes rather than execute him for rebellion. Now, Finnigan, this is my offer. If you go into the floating palace of King Azrael of the Void Kingdom and destroy the keys of prosperity, I will cancel every debt you owe me and pay off anything you may still owe at this permanent present moment. Take it or leave it." Finnigan looked at Inari confused. "Wait, you want me to destroy the keys of prosperity? Did I stutter? No. Then what'll it be? Are you going to destroy the keys of prosperity, or are you going into a labor camp until I die of old age, which I mind will be a very long time?" And Finnigan, knowing the keys of prosperity were one of the greatest symbols of the Kitsune clan, which he hated, he was all the more eager and answered, "I'm destroying those idols." "Good boy. Now, as for you two, I heard you're part of an American program for the magically gifted, and meant to deal with magical threats normal military force wouldn't be optimal for. So, I can't reasonably expect to keep you here, so this little agreement I made to have you encultured into kitsunes is null and void." Inari then made her way to her throne room, and had Buck and Natalia and Finnigan stand before her as she said to them, "I think it is clear we both have a common enemy, regardless of tanuki, fairy, kitsune, or anyone else. With the keys of prosperity in the hands of that Dark Mage, Isis, she's able to raise a force much more formidable than what can be raised on my little archipelago. So, to prevent that lunatic from destroying us both, I am asking you, along with your country, to cooperate in destroying this artifact. The good news is that you only have to physically destroy them for them to become useless. Then it's just a matter of getting rid of the dark magic that still lingers, in which my brother will be instrumental in making sure that happens here. Now, I will contact your government about this arrangement while you are taken care of here. I no longer call you Tanukis coons, but rather friends who should have been recognized the moment we first met. Inari's proposal. To my dearest friend and right paw handman, I know what I did to you over the years wasn't right. And if you deny my request, I understand, and I will accept that as your choice. It's only right. I deserve the hate for what I did. But my request comes in light of this. There's now a medical treatment that exists so I can have kits at my old age. And my request is that you be the father. I know what happened and how you have wondered what it was like if your family hadn't been murdered by Tanukis. And I have longed to have a family of my own. But I've wasted so much of my life on meaningless things. So, I'm offering you a second chance at being a father of a family, and to serve our kingdom in a way that really matters. If I am to be your wife, I will honor you and show the respect you rightfully deserve as my husband, and fulfill my wifely duties as understood in our culture. And if I must become a Christian to marry you, then I will. I cannot, in good conscience, any more stay with the cult of Okami Inari, because now she seems like a demon. And if you have the opportunity to have a family again, and for the kingdom to have an heir, and I will be able to become a mother, which is something I've always wanted and put off for too long. A potential wife and companion to a future king, Inari, or as my father called me, Shiro. After Sozin had read Inari's handwritten message to him, he thought about the opportunity and saw how much Inari had changed over the past year for the better, and how even though he didn't live in her palace anymore, she still looked after him and cared about him to make sure he had a good life. And even though he still thought about his wife from centuries ago and his son, he realized that was a long time ago, and he had to accept what had happened and move on. So he did, and thought about rekindling his relationship with Inari, not as a master, but as a friend who took accountability for her life and tried to be better. He also remembered how Inari always seemed to be attracted to him for centuries, and only let him sleep in the same bed as her when she was feeling cold or scared. She also, every now and then, gave little romantic gestures towards him, but didn't go further than kisses and cuddles because she felt like she couldn't, because of their two different social castes. And he would be lying to himself if he said he didn't enjoy having a beautiful vixen snuggle up with him, who respected him, which made him think maybe living with Inari wouldn't be so bad. Inari then met up with Sozin again for an intimate date inside her palace's private dining room, looking her absolute best for him, but felt strange emotions inside herself that were making her feel both excited and nervous. And for the first time in a long time she began blushing while failing to flirt with her future husband. But Sozin just found this cute, which only made Inari blush more. And as she began to be catechized by her brother in secret, with the intent of turning away from her old life, This was the beginning of Okami Inari's downfall.